You'd be so kind as to drop a HackMD in the notes if you haven't already. Okay, beautiful. September 7th, 2022. Beautiful Wednesday navigation call. Thanks for being here. So I wanted to spend today seeing if we could actually roll up our sleeves and do some navigation together, because we're kind of at a really fun, critical, exciting gesture where things are changing. So kind of an exciting point in time. So let's maybe consider this kind of a mid 6-week cycle retro. There's some things that I'd like to just see if we could all kind of sync up on, compare the patterns that we're seeing, and then make some key adjustments that hopefully will be really helpful. And hopefully we can do that kind of in the context of all that we've been accomplishing. So I'm finding for myself that there's this dynamic that's happening where, even though sometimes it feels like it's slow or bumpy or uneven, it's like as we get through these little milestones, obviously, like the next vista opens up and I could see things that I couldn't see, even a week or two before. And from multiple spots in the network, I think that's kind of happening for people. So I wanted to just take today to really sense into those patterns, make some key adjustments. I think you guys know that Kilu and I and Graham are going to Estonia next week. So next week will be a little uneven. And then one of the things that I'd love to emerge with clarity on today is some of the key working groups we're going to try to pull into areas of high function over the next several weeks. So with that, so let's start with talking about maybe patterns that we're noticing or seeing, and in this context of kind of a mid-cycle adjustment. Both Wendy and Judy and Pete both had observations this week on how things are working and how we might adjust and what we need to be clear on and those kind of things. So would it be okay if we just kind of dive into some listening about people's patterns they're seeing? And then towards, maybe we'll spend let's say somewhere between half and 2/3 of the meeting kind of getting clear on the patterns, and then we'll close out with the key adjustments that we're going to make and establishing clarity around the key functional working groups that we need to get performing in order to take next steps. So do I have rough consent to that agenda? Does that sound okay to everybody? Okay, cool. So let's go into to deep listening mode. Pete, I know you might not be comfortable with this, but may I have permission to ask you to share some of the blunt, direct observations you shared with me? That'd be okay?
Yeah, sure. I will try to be more direct than I want to be. I don't know how well
Yeah,
I'll be
please.
with that. But let me start a little bit more softly than that. I think a pattern that or the pattern I'm kind of waiting to see emerge is for people who are really passionate to be doing the things they're really passionate about, and getting resources for that work from the network, the larger network, whatever that is. I don't care too much. I mean, I care a lot, but the pattern is really how do we get more resources to help people who are doing the stuff they really want to do and they're doing anyway already. How do we get them more resources so they can do more of it? Jordan and I spoke 45 minutes ago, something like that, briefly, and I think what Jordan is asking is, a thing that I see with Jordan in Lionsburg. Jordan is an amazing and wonderful person, and I think his superpowers, the thing that he can do that other people can't do as well, are convening and shepherding. So helping everybody cluster around and then help everybody get moving in a forward direction together. And the thing that I think Jordan is especially good at, he's done it a bunch of times for me, is like you get strayed off a little bit, you get a little bit distracted. It's like, I'm tired, I don't want to do this anymore. I think we're not doing the right thing. Jordan is really good at picking gently back up and pointing back towards the right direction, the North Star for everybody, right? So I feel like that's Jordan's superpower. I also feel like Jordan has got a life work that he's done building stuff. Jordan knows a lot about how to move big projects, really big projects, into action and commitment and production and recovery from little misadjustments and things like that. And Jordan, I think, would love to do that. And if he had enough time and energy, he would just like do everything the Meta project needs to get done. And I think that's the wrong thing to do. Um, uh, Strength and commitment for building stuff isn't going to be big enough to get the whole thing done. So what I was telling Jordan is like, dude, I think you should focus on your superpowers, shepherding and convening, and pull back a little bit on being the person driving program management, or the person driving the team driving the program management. So I feel like the thing for Landsberg to do is to gather resources, help everybody with structure, and then cultivate the things that it wants to see. But I think also it should be not in the business of actually doing any of that. It needs to help other people actually be the arms and legs and feet and hands and heads doing stuff together. So that was my pitch to Jordan in a few minutes ago.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. One thing that I love and appreciate about Pete is that although he doesn't like to be direct, I appreciate how truthful and forthright you are with the group, Pete. Thank you. So let's dialogue a little bit, or let's sense or discern into what Pete is presenting as a hypothesis.
I'm gonna like tack on a coda maybe. So there's some obvious things. Um, One of them is that I don't like take the UN SDGs if we wanted kind of a top level set of goals. Um, there are people in the world working on every little piece of those. Um, I think most of us here aren't going to cover all of the SDGs very well. Each of us has, their own passion and their own projects that they work on. I work on Massive Wiki and other things. Wendy's working on Tapestry. Vincent works on Catalyst. Michael's working on Factor. Those are things we're going to be doing anyway. It's hard to roll them up and cover all of the SDGs that way. So we have a kind of a weird chicken and egg situation. We don't have the right people to do all the things that we want to do. And maybe the things that people are passionate about doing aren't the things that we particularly wanted to do. So we can either look for the right people, or, and I think this one is better, we can pick people that we know are strong at doing stuff and use them as tent poles, basically, to start percolating, evolving, emerging a structure of people working together, even if it's not exactly what we wanted to do. But again, I think the thing that we need to do is make sure that people are doing the things that they're passionate about and passionate about doing about the things that they are doing. And that's like the key to making this all work at scale.
There was article in the Wall Street Journal this morning on the disengaged workforce. I think the most recent Gallup poll shows that's like at the highest ever. And I think there was something, I forget what it was, 20 or 30% of respondents said they were like passionately and actively engaged in their job. 30% said they were actively disengaged. And, the other 60% said they were doing the bare minimum basically to get by and not get fired. So that was interesting, right? And I think it illustrates what Pete's saying is you can't buy the passion and risk required to go do what we need to do with money. Like you can't put a bunch of people on the payroll and say, let's do this. So what Pete was saying, and he said a little bit differently this morning, is you need to find the people who are already out there and going to be doing it no matter what, and just help them do it a little bit better and faster and more resourced and more coordinated and more together versus trying to. So anyway, that all makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about this too. And I think some of these points came up last week and they were percolating for me throughout the whole week. And what did I do? Of course, I built a flow. What did the flow help me see? The flow helped me see that really it's almost like we have to do two things at once. And I agree with Pete that the passion is the thread of both things. One is, once we have a sense of that, we can either push things in one of two ways. We can either say, hey, who's in the room? What are they passionate about? Where does that intersect? Allow that to emerge and then fund it and enable it and support it and resource it. Or we can say, what is it we're trying to get done? Who do we need to get that thing done? Find the people that already love doing that thing, source them, resource them, support them, get it done. And I think the truth is, for a group that's trying to collaborate at such a high level and across so many different places, we need to be thinking about both at the same time, right? So there's an awareness that there's never going to be a case where we always have the right people in the right room at the right time. And so that came up in our social architecture meeting today. It helped me rephrase really I helped to frame for the social architecture group, maybe our real purpose in that group is to keep thinking about how do we get the right people in the right place at the right time, in the right way, with the right tech, right? So that we're thinking about the flow, whether somebody comes in because they were drawn to this group and they have something to offer up and they're ready to give, or they were drawn to this group because someone invited them specifically to come in because they had the right skills or talent for a particular project, or because they came in the back door around somewhere, like they don't even know how they ended up here. However they end up here, how do we get them into the right spots and resource that individual, that project, that organization, right? Then it's about scale and scope, doing it slightly differently in order to align everything for the best good of everyone, trying to advance the SDGs in this case, or whatever else we might choose to focus on. That felt very freeing to me, and in what seemed to be this kind of lock trap of wanting this to be a place where we can collaborate from a place of resonance and emergence and passion, and yet recognition that it's not enough to move any one thing forward because our scope is so big. So I was trying to wrestle with that and realized we were missing the piece of inviting the right people in, of picking some areas of focus and inviting the right people in to make sure that we have all the people that we need.
Worst?
Am I getting it unmuted? Now I'm unmuted.
Yeah.
Okay. Building on what you said, Wendy, which sounds really great. That's the experience that we've had with Planetary Care is that there is, at least from our case, there's sufficient platforms available and sufficient interest that when one is really clear about wanting to pull in particular people that are values aligned to be able to do particular tasks, that's actually quite achievable. What's much more difficult to achieve is actually having the inner core group plus the digital infrastructure necessary to handhold, to train, to oversee, to manage, essentially, in a good way of that term, to get the desired outcome that a particular project might be about. So I think that both and is really key, and it almost fits in those two places, like that inner core, which it has to have that flexibility of being able to wear lots of different hats, move around, and be able to adjust while as that gets more robust. And it really all comes back to resourcing, because without the resourcing, then you have a much smaller pool to be able to access.
So Forrest, we've talked about this. I'm gonna try to just weave in and summarize back what I think you're saying as it has related to our previous conversation. So I think what we're seeing out there in the network is like all the good, passionate people, organizations, groups, et cetera, are out there. And there's enough technology and communication and goodwill in the network that when there's clarity around what needs to be accomplished and how people can plug in, there's plenty of desire, interest, passion to do that. Where we're struggling is with the actual building of the context, the structure, and I don't know, organizational framework it takes for a core to be able to coordinate that whole network it has been elusive, right? So then where we might go if we were thinking about systems design is to go, okay, we're going to have a large distributed network of passionate teams. If we pick up on what Pete's saying, we want to find those teams that are already out there doing whatever they're going to be doing anyway, but could maybe go faster. And, so Planetary Care is a great example, like you and Marianne and your allies are doing that regardless of not having as much resources as you like, and you're sacrificing a lot. And so you want to find Pete's org, Brad's org, Wendy's orgs, all those different things are already moving despite. So then if we could build and resource the kind of core team and infrastructure to coordinate across those, that might be kind of the missing link. So there's the resources, the core team and infrastructure, and then the coordination of the distributed networks of passionate teams. Is it something like that? Or correct me where.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, thank you. That was great. I also think about it from a point of view of a pie chart, and needing to think that you want to make sure that the right enough energy is being put into different sections of this pie chart that include when you're bringing people in, particularly when you're bringing people in. And that pie chart distribution is going to change, particularly over the first 90 days of where attention might be given. So the attention to onboarding is like a really important intention that we have gotten feedback from other organizations that have been very successful with this. Another attention is really recognizing we want to, by supporting passion, we have to recognize that they're coming from very different broad sets of background, of knowledge, of kind of a systems view of life, of how this fits together, of the various technologies, and wanting to give access and a little bit support, not overwhelm, but enough to feel coherent within the group. So those would be the couple other pieces.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Mary, so go ahead, Marianne.
Yeah, just clarifying question. I did miss a few meetings. So if our goal is to meet the 17 SDGs, there are many focuses within each SDG, right? One could be food and water, that can go across many of them. There are thousands of organizations and people who are working towards all those different parts of those SDGs. So I'm
Correct.
hearing that we want to really slowly bring them all into the Meta project, I guess in phases. And we need to figure out what order and, you know, how fast can we do that? And how do we coordinate and structure all that? Because they're all working on this.
Yeah,
And we need
exactly.
to align values, and when there's some things we need to get done to do it right. So that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, so Marianne, like what, in the inception of this, what we found was exactly what you just said. It's like, okay, all the absolutely brilliant, heroic efforts towards everything are already underway.
Mhm.
There's nothing that doesn't, there's nothing that God in the universe didn't 10 or 20 years call somebody to who
Mhm.
spent a lifetime now developing that thing, right? And we simultaneously couldn't find any organization that, if resourced and pushed to its end, would actually be able to accomplish the total set of global goals, let's say, or design and build the future that we're all moving towards. So therefore, it was like, okay, there's it's almost like parts. Someone used, I think Pete earlier used the analogy of the body, like the hands and the feet, whatever. Let's say the hands and the feet and the ears and the eyes are strewn across the earth and they're all out there. The basic problem is they're not functioning as a coordinated body that's actually
Mhm.
capable of moving around the world, picking things up, getting things done, and doing, right? So that was the whole inception of this, Lionsburg and the Meta project, was that understanding. And so to continue that analogy, there's an old prophetic vision in the Jewish scriptures that's a prophet standing looking over a valley, and the valley's full of dry bones, right? Just dry bones out there. And the prophet hears a voice that says, speak to the dry bones. And so as the prophet starts speaking, the bones start rising up and coming into structure, right? And all of a sudden you have life, right? And so it's something like that vision, right? It's like, okay, all the amazing parts and pieces are out there. How do we speak to that, right? How do we speak to that and bring that up into some kind of functional unity, so that all of a sudden together we're accomplishing what we never could have accomplished in isolation, but with each of those things, playing its unique, like their unique role. So it's not all coming together to become one undifferentiated thing, but it's I think what you just said is correct. It's like, how do we sequence out all those things and connect them into the right places at the right time, give them the right support, connect them up to the neural networks they need, the energy they need, whatever, so that they can function in their unique way as part of a whole. So I think that gets to, kind of this whole flow that, okay, does that match kind of what you're thinking, Marianne?
And I think the brilliance of what you're saying is that we all need the same goals, right? You might be solving the SDGs, but you could be running in different directions and pulling away from what you're trying to do, right? So if you coordinate everybody with the same goals and values and metrics, then you can pull in the same direction. Otherwise, you're just flailing. So I agree.
And Marianne, as a expert systems designer, right? The extension of that is this differentiation of value and waste in a goal delivery system, right? So like Toyota Production System, Lean have taught us that all that uncoordinated activity is actually waste that's inhibiting throughput of the goal.
Totally.
So that's kind of funny. It's like all that activity towards the global goals might actually be what's stopping us from accomplishing the global goals. And so
he's wasted.
Exactly. And it's getting in the way, it's confusing things, it's causing misdirected funding. So the coming together and coordination and the resourcing and connection of the right things, right times, right reasons to get that flowing. And then I want to connect it back to what Pete's saying again, is that all that effort, like those body parts around the world, those aren't things we're trying to fabricate. Those are like things dying to become the fullness of themselves already. Right. So that's, I think, such a critical insight that Pete's bringing in is we don't have to reinvent them. We don't have to try to go create Massive Wiki because Pete already built it. We don't have to go try to create Factor. Michael already built it. Don't have to create Tapestry. Wendy already built it, right? Don't have to create Planetary Care. You guys have already built it. So all those things are already there. It's just the mechanisms for connecting and empowering. Okay, Bill.
Yeah, thanks, Jordan. I like what you're saying. I've been with you for 4 years now, 4 years plus. And I'll reiterate a little bit of what you just said. When we started, we looked at the fragmentation in the nonprofit world and the hyper competition and fragmentation and extremes in the for-profit world, and thought we need to deal with that and unify our approach through all fronts, like salting the earth and spreading light. It touches everything. So what I ponder here in this discussion is the extent to which our superpowers as individuals need to be considered, which is highly. People will not function happily if they don't feel that their heart's in their work. And like I said when we were meeting this morning, Jordan, everyone's going to say, hey, I can do this thing. But if they're not passionate about it, it's just an item on a resume. And they'll say that they like what they're going to do. So finding people who truly have a passion for something is important. But here's the thing I think we can ask ourselves. Not just what are our individual superpowers, but since there's so many people out there doing so many good things and we don't even know about them, they don't know about each other. The real question is, what is the superpower of this community? That's what you and I were looking for, in all these years of assembling a structure. It's what's missing. And the missing thing, as you're, pointing to, is unity and coordination. And so to be aggregators and unifiers and message takers, as well as getting our fingers into the different soil of activity, because if you don't do something, it's harder to talk about it, but to be the aggregators and to be the connectors and the servants of the process is really, I think, the collective superpower. And another thing is the messaging. There are a lot of people out there who don't like the UN. They don't embrace anything the UN says. Just because the UN says it, they don't like it. But they do believe in conservation and hard work and integrity and diligence. So I think our messaging needs to be clarified and people need to be given a rationale to embrace a different way of looking at the earth. And they're fragmented and they wish it could be better. And so we have the ability to unify messages and to spread a better message, because when things are fragmented, they are ineffective. And there are those in this world who have an agenda to keep people fragmented, so their own grip on power can't be fractured.
Yeah.
So
Bill's good at asking profound questions. In a session a little bit ago, he said, what's the one thing that everybody thinks is impossible, but if you could accomplish it, like everything would change, right? All the dominoes would fall, everything can be accomplished. And the unanimous answer in that working group was this idea of some kind of higher order functional unity. It's like all the pieces are out there. It's impossible as human beings to work together, apparently. But if we could, like everything else would be covered, right? So that right there is like the core. So Pete, I'm thinking about what you said about superpowers and what's ours to do and what's not ours to do. That's something like convening and shepherding. And if it's happens to be true, we can also build useful tools and technology and gather resources that empower people. like all the better, right? So that all kind of feels to me like it's speaking to the same flow or the same stream of direction in it. Jason?
Yeah, I think I think unity is kind of where we are from, and fragmentation is what we've worked our way into. So we're just returning or adapting. I keep going back to kind of complexity thinking and knowing there's all this activity and action happening. And if slicing from one lens, it could look like chaos and actually be chaos unless there's an attractor. And so I keep thinking of, is this a forum for the attractor that allows people to test against that which is kind of coming together in whatever form it's coming together in? So is the attractor some set of unity? Is the attractor some set of principle? People call it goals. Principles is one I think of. Values, metrics, that says this is how you play if you want to play. And then a lot of what I hear is kind of feels like a community of practice perspective. And so when I was thinking of community practice, they are resourced and they have very specific roles. Some roles are for connecting. Some roles are for holding the material. So we have different people who have these strengths already, but they tend to be resourced in a way that there is an allocated time either paid for or recognized. That's the attention that's given to allocate that time in a way that allows other people to come in and come out. Onboarding in a community practice is a key process. So there's a lot of those things that come to mind. And if there's a place where people can connect to take what they're working on and passionate and see how it plays into this attractor or not, it would allow then people to then figure out where do they need to connect and how does that emerge versus control it.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I'm going to weave that, what you just said, that emergence and control, back into Michael's comment on mycelium and Wendy's comment on vision and values, and into what you said, Jason, on the attractor, right? So it's almost like there's the establishing of the North Star, the values, the shared goals, the principles, the boundaries in which the play can manifest. And then there's the passionate goal-directed play that happens, but it takes kind of the structuring. So Wendy, what I think you were saying in the chat is it takes some level of architecture or coherence from the top to set that vision and directory and boundaries and the container in which the play can manifest. And then once that's all structured, then it can become about passion and play and cultivation and all those things. And so that's kind of the both and that we're trying to thread. And then you layer in this issue of coordination. It's like, okay, as we're all passionately playing, how do we more effectively play each day than we played the day before, right? So I think those things are all coming together. And the one other just thread that I want to weave in that is coming in so much is this desire for decentralization and sovereignty and autonomy and all those things. And every single week I'm on the phone with people who are so frustrated because you end up kind of flailing, right? So I think what Wendy was just saying about how those things come together, like how you can both have total sovereignty and autonomy among teams that are going, but also the goal direction, the values, the coordination, and the things that allow that to actually, accomplish something. That's maybe where the magic would be. Wendy E.
Here we go. So Jason, thank you very much for that. And I think that you've brought in a level of thinking that I think that we need to get better at. So if we're going to keep this sort of paradox of people wanting to provide structure to people who will fight it if that structure doesn't seem to serve their needs, and waiting to see what it is that you produce and finding out if what we produce is actually useful to them or not, which is often disappointment, if that makes sense. You know, this deep listening to people. Anyway, the main point here I want to make is that this, a lot of the reason that we have problems is because we try and force structure where structure can't be forced. So when you try and force order into a system, people will resist that if that order doesn't seem to be delivering what it is. And so you have to be very careful to make sure that we understand how complexity works, which is why I like what Jason has said. Yeah. Our job really is just to create, I guess, if I say the theory, but the practice theory around a space that could actually help people and understand whether it actually is doing that or whether it's just disappointing them in new and different ways. Because people will jump right out of that one and into another one, which is what's happening again and again and again and again and again. So while we've got the capacity to provide structure, the minute that structure is not right, people will go another place, which is just repeating the pattern again. It's like, oh, if not this community, then that community. But no one's actually listening to the experience of the people that are coming in really deeply. And that experience has got a lot of variety in it, but some similarity. So my point here is, one, I do think that we need to get good at, if I say the theory of how complexity works and emergence works, which I haven't seen yet, not properly, but the words are coming in, like attractors, one of those words. And this, acknowledge the fact that this paradox will always exist. People jump between order and unorder, disorder, they'll jump around those spaces and make noise in our world and make noise in their own world, because we have to be patient for it to come out of our shared experiences to say this roughly works, and because it roughly works better than anything else I've seen, I'm staying in this one spot. And unless you can give people that feedback and they can give themselves that feedback, the system doesn't steady. It just keeps on making more and more noise. So Jason, what I really like is you're bringing that language in. And, I on a Dave Snowden's work and such, this is the energy. We've got to be able to see what the energy of people's actual experience is of the structures that just steady things a little bit, just enough for somebody to go off and do the next thing in a solid way. So I've put forward that, we can concentrate on a specific project like what Jason's been doing in one particular community to actually hear how change took place in that community. We would have a way of steadying our own practice around the structures that worked and didn't work and learn from that. It would give us a way of learning quickly as a group from somebody who's actually been running something for a period of time in a context that's close enough to you in the States. Now, this is the kicker. If you try and do the same thing in another community somewhere else, you're going to learn different lessons, but they'll have a roughly similar thing. Like, don't tell people what they must do. Help them learn what works for them. There's a tension between those two things. So roughly, don't force them into A. Give them an opportunity to learn what works and get that feedback is a better rule. So I guess that's a little messy, but A, the language of complexity and change at the top level to steady our group. Don't force structure on people. Help them learn what structures work for them and help them with those structures locally. And really pay attention to the experience that people are having of their own system as us paying attention to the experience we're having of our system. Because the two have got to get strong together.
Could you repeat that? Same thing. Could you repeat that last bullet point? So you said don't force it. Structure. What was that final bullet point?
We experience our own mess. So the extent to which we are good at listening to other people will be reflected in our own system. So if we are confused because we don't have a theory of change, we don't understand how complexity and emergence work, we will force that into other people, and other people will actually tell us that in a very subtle way. So while they're growing as an organization, we need to deeply listen to our own experience, which is partly what we're doing, and pick the energy of that and how well it is working and how well it is not working as real-time feedback. Because if we don't pay attention to our own system, we can't do it for someone else. And they'll let us know. They are letting us know. You bring 2 new people in, they'll tell you, this is what I'm not getting from what you're trying to do. And then we need to go upstream and find out why that is. So I think part of it is that we don't have a language of complexity and change, that we are constantly hanging our messaging and actions on. Emergence is hard, especially in Western culture where everyone expects it to be, you can build a dam and the dam will hold water. In Australia, I can show you that you just build a dam and the water will rain exactly where it's going to rain and it will flow exactly where it's going to flow. And it might not rain when you've built the dam, but there's water around. You're just not going to find it where you expected to find it. It should be in this place and it turns up everywhere else. So
Thank you.
maybe not as clear as I would like that to have been, but language of complexity, change management, listen to ourselves, listen to other people, help them where they're at, track it.
Yeah, hold on, Megan. That was great, Wendy. You said that maybe wasn't as clear as you'd like to be, and then you said a perfectly clear closing summary that Wendy caught in notes, and I hope I caught. So thank you. Well said and well processed. Appreciate that. Keela?
Thank you, everyone, for the conversation. I've been sitting back and kind of listening and just taking in what it is that we're saying. Because I think that as a group, now we've come a certain way together and we could probably all say some of the same things, and then we say some of the things that are, specific to us. And one of the things that we are seeing, that we're saying, that I think is dangerous, although it's also useful, but probably not helpful, is this notion that there are other people who have experience and somehow we're going to learn from it. Because the world is full of white papers and speakers and experts and consultants and, millions of them, literally around the world, with all sorts of experience. Some of it very good and entirely relevant. But if it hasn't worked so far, then it's not going to work with us unless we do something very different. So I think that if we just stay aware of that we can't, to me, that's a path that doesn't work any better than what's out there already. Now, I would hire experts when expertise is needed, absolutely. Or I would need, if I were to have a facilitator or a builder or anything like that with expertise, absolutely bring them in. But I think that for us, if learning from other people's wisdom and experience is kind of off the table, if we're honest enough about our own humanity and that of pretty much everybody else, we're not that much better than everybody else. And so if we're not that much better than everybody else, then we can't really expect ourselves to learn that much from everybody else's wisdom without reluctance. We just don't do that. I don't know why, but we don't. Then there is another open avenue. I think I'm going to sneeze. So apologies in advance if that sneaks up on me. And the other open avenue is to do something that we have been doing pretty well here. I think I very much like Jason's and Wendy's comments, with some qualifiers, right? And what we get to do is we get to manage the energy. We get to manage what it feels like. We get to manage what we feel like is possible that other people will also feel. We all know when I'm assuming we all know what it's like to join something that is sort of snowballing and getting bigger and getting more exciting. And the feel of that and the energy of that, or catching that kind of a wave. Sometimes it just happens, but much of the time it's created and then sustained and then repaired when broken and then brought in again. It's often not articulated that way, but very good leaders know how to do that, for example. Very good groups know how to hold that, especially if they're conversant whatever the language they use, if they're conversant experientially in holding the coherence and holding the stability in the group in such a way that emergence can happen. And that is very energizing. That is individually energizing as well as energizing to the group. And in that case, that's also wisdom sort of in the air that is arising and an experience of that arising. We know when that's good and when that's not good. So I'm just wondering how much, I don't have an answer, but since we're speaking into the space, what's there, I'm speaking my wondering, I'm wondering how much, if we were to be masters, not of marketing, which is different, that's more lipstick on a pig kind of a thing. And, you know, I go for it. I mean, I like things marketed to me at times. But if it's truly an experience of emergence that keeps energizing us, and we are actually holding the container of that while we're listening to the emergence. Because and you can listen with wisdom, you can listen with intellect, you can listen with analysis, you can listen with other people's work, you can listen with just observation. So right now we have been listening, we've been saying that around the world, there is different groups, they're moving in the same direction, they're doing different things, but generally they're, you know, doing the one thing. And moreover, they want to come together and they talk about coming together. And even so, they don't know how to get along and how to handle themselves and each other. And, you know, none of us do. But that's sort of listening to what is emerging. And if we get good at listening to what is emerging, then we get ourselves energized. And it's not just sort of hocus pocus talk. This truly is, I mean, I can't prove it other than just invite people along, but having worked with innovation and innovation groups that are innovating as an innovation funder for the last 22 years, it's a daily thing. It's a normal thing. It's a natural thing. Not everyone does it well, but when it's done well, to recognize it as an experience. People want to join the company. They want to be in that team. They don't want to leave. Otto Scharmer, precisely. Another example of the emergence and, you know, how to engineer it and how to lead groups with it. And so maybe where that leaves me here is that if, while we're still figuring out the number one thing, which I agree is the most important thing, which is how to get along well with each other and ourselves, right? Which is hard. While we're working on that, if we were to be able to very intentionally and in precise awareness create an experience which includes structure and processes and energy and ways of showing up and ways of bringing people in and, you know, all that practical stuff. But if we were able to create an experience, feel, and you just recognize and you say, I want more of that. And then that experience is not a performance. It's not like something you pay and then you see something on the stage, you go home. But it's an experience that is a fully engaged experience. Then some of the magic of the natural rules that already exist will start working on our behalf. That's my guess. And when I say the magic of the natural rules, one of them is everything's connected already. Everyone's connected already. Ask physicists, ask biologists, they can explain the science behind it. Ask others, we know it, right? And some of that is going to have a space to come out more. But we need to be able to listen. And some of that listening happens in these held spaces and containers of emergence, but they need skill. However, if you engineer the experience such that you just want to be part of that, and you also keep the practical, you move forward, whatever direction you decide to go, people are much more likely to stick around. If they stick around, they're much more likely to produce something of value. Then one other, kind of unrelated, but, you know, related in that it's about meta project concept is, for me, the most valuable aspect is also the potential to connect, aggregate, serve, and thus put visible value on, you know, all these different efforts, as opposed to have it be a fragmented set of, you know, multiple but invisible and not respected and not fully valued events and organizations. And by value, I don't mean just monetary value, although that will also get included, right? But it's just as being made visible as a possibility that one can now believe in, hope in, and join. And then you choose who you join. There's a bigger than an alphabet soup of many different doers. And if you can get that somehow held in that kind of experience where there is support and service as well as emergence, that'll be very hard to break. I think in some ways, if we're thinking of engineering something, that's something to engineer. And it's probably more doable than we think.
It was beautiful, Keela, just providing a moment for us to sit with that. This is an amazing concept, thinking that we actually may have the agency as creatively conscious beings to engineer the type of experience and the type of world that you're talking about, right? As a design builder, that's like so close to my heart. So it's amazing to hear you talking about kind of the energy and magic of the space that we might all. Thanks, Brad. Really great to have you here. That space and that field, great to see it. That we all need, and then the idea that we proactively engineer that is I think exactly on point. And then back to what the superpowers of this group might be. It's like, since we can't go out, the X dozen of us that are here, we can't go out and accomplish the global goals. What we can go out and accomplish is engineering that space and resources and technology and field that would allow for all that to manifest. Super beautiful. All right, Phil.
Yeah, I have a series of half-formed thoughts on notes here, so I might institute the "there's no stupid comment" rule at some point. I'm going to try to be coherent as Keela was, but I hear unity, convening, shepherding. Bill said aggregating. I think there's something important about transparency too when we're talking about connecting so many superpowers of so many entities. That I guess one of my favorite comments from the corporate world is what the HP CEO said. If HP only knew what HP knows, we'd be in a lot better shape. So meaning that there's just a lot of stuff out there that we actually have, we know, but we're not using that info, we don't know we know it. And so by transparency, I mean, maybe if you have these connections, if we're aggregating and convening, you can see what the connections have and how things interconnect, so that I might know that the person that I'm working with, Jordan, like you, I'm in design build, might be an electrical contractor, but they also worked on a similar contractor, and they know a signage, or to see it, to follow the route of other people's networks. Right now, it's kind of hidden. I mean, sometimes it's open, but to make that transparent, I think, can lead to more connections and more convening and more unity that I think I'm hearing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, very much, Phil. Phil, Brad DeGraff, who just hopped off on this illumination of the paths of networking and knowing what we know and who we know and how they're connected. Brad, who just jumped off, is an expert in and passionate about social graphs. And so, for instance, if we set up a node on their software with the 12 people who are on this call, their software could then comb all of our LinkedIn connections and create like a heat map of who we all know and how we're connected, and dispense with the sales and marketing people that we accidentally connected with, and figure out what the quality is. And so I think there's a really interesting way to merge what you just said about transparency, what Kilu said maybe about the architecture of that unfolding experience with the pragmatic technology in the field that can illuminate those pathways of connection. Okay, Wendy, and then we have 30 minutes left, and whenever it's right, I'd like to turn the corner once this feels complete towards talking about a couple of the core teams and functions that are needed in order to really facilitate and hold this space through the next transition in a way that's adequate or excellent. Thanks, Phil. Wendy?
Okay, then I'll make an effort to try to sum up as I go along as well. Some of the threads that I'm hearing too, and appreciate Phil, you saying the word unity. I'm also hearing it throughout what everyone is saying, the sense of needing to create spaces for emergence. I've heard that. Spaces for connection, spaces for deep listening. I would say those are integrally involved with each other. I really liked whoever said a community of practice. These are spaces of community of practice. I have been waiting for the moment where it feels right to say, I think the navigation meeting should be a facilitated meeting where we practice that. We practice the connection and allow that to loop out and around, and also offer everyone in the group an opportunity to share and practical things to come in. And then we allow for emergence. And then we share some more things. So it's structured and it's also emergent, right? And that we're playing with that, because the better we get at that, when the rubber starts meeting the road and we start having projects come in and funding flow through, and we're all playing different, we maybe start feeling a little stretched. The more we practice this emergent to practical to emergent to practical to emergent to practical, the better we'll get at listening, even when things get noisy, chaotic, busy, loud, and priorities start screaming at us. Right? We'll still be able to listen to each other, listen to the fringes, listen to the stories, listen to them patterning that is required to help us understand when we are pulling, when like Marianne was referring to too, and Jordan, when you were talking about how if everything's funded and not coordinated, oftentimes there's things that are pulling it at opposites. And you're actually not moving at all, even though there's a lot of activity. And to me, that's where the emergent helps goes, no, this thing first, then that thing. Or yes, that's good, but if we all shifted in this direction, that would end up being the cornerstone for everyone. So if everyone could focus on this one thing first, right, it helps to prioritize better. That's what my experience with it has been. And I think it starts with, and Wendy E was kind of getting at this as well, it starts with this environment and getting really good at creating these environments. I think everyone in this space has already had experience with that. And again, this goes back to Wendy E was saying, getting better at it, putting language on it, recognizing it, for what it is and the strength that it provides the group, so that we can use it as a tool and remind each other of its importance as we go along. Thanks.
Thank you, Wendy. There's something that's like pinging me about this idea of so Kilu's this idea of creating the space, engineering, getting good at the experience that we're trying to have together, that we hope everybody can have in the future, right? So we're trying to almost like embody. We're trying to almost embody like the whatever it is that's the future we hope everybody will experience, right? And I think there's something really critical about what you just said, Wendy, about the order in which that happens. Bill, this ties to our conversation this morning. It's like we couldn't articulate right now, we couldn't write down yet all the mechanics of how we need to be together 24 months from now. because we don't know, we haven't experienced it yet, right? It's like we haven't experienced what life's like on the other side of the chasm in the new world. So as we try to act it out or embody it together, we'll progressively be able to put language on it or like name it. We'll progressively maybe be able to recognize what it is that we're doing. Then we'll maybe be progressively able to kind of say it in a rough way, then maybe put some language on it, and then progressively turn it into like tools or patterns that can be propagated. But the way you articulated that, Wendy, I think is exactly right. It's like we can't create the tools yet till we experience it, you know. So it's like we're moving through this experiential thing that will get better and better articulated as we do it. And there's no other way, right? There's no other way than to try to act it out, learn what's working and not, and get better. Okay, Forrest, thanks for letting me process that real quick.
Oh, absolutely. And this is just real quick, reinforcing, I think, what Wendy just shared. And what I was hearing is, to me, the value of ritual. This might not be the way that one might normally use the word ritual in terms of having a meeting the way you're talking about, but basically a ritual is a pattern for a particular purpose that people agree to utilize that is intended to impact energetics as well as the physical that's going on, and it's a dance between the two. So, yeah.
Forrest, I want to validate that by and tie it back to our conversations on core values and holding fields by saying that the smartest person I've ever heard talk about values says that organizations maybe shouldn't define their 5 core values. Maybe they should, but maybe they shouldn't. But what they should really be defining is the core behaviors of how that shows up and the rituals that keep it on track. Right. And so it's like, so there's this idea of abstract values, but how does it actually show up in patterns? And I think what I hear you saying is that there's this element of ritual that helps create the containers in which the patterns can be acted out and remembered across time. It's maybe something like that. Does that feel about what you're saying?
Yeah, key. Well, and particularly on what you were just saying about values as the single words are too broad, and really having a set of operationalized values. How do I recognize that value in the world? And then, as you're talking about, yes, the rituals, if we're to use that word, which I happen to like. I think it's a pattern that goes all the way back to the indigenous, and it goes back to nature. And so,
Yeah, great. Thank you, Forrest. Okay, Wendy E, then Wendy M, and then I'd like to just save a few minutes for patterning at the end, but this is perfect what's happening. Wendy E.
I think I'd like to just riff on that experience of energy, because each of our interactions has an experience for us as individuals, and the better we get at convening and have a ritual of sharing at the end how that experience is, if it's structured, we can create a map of that shared experience at the end of a meeting. So number one, that would be that our structure is actually working for us. If the energy is tracking in a way that allows us to say, well, that meeting actually held together, it had the right ingredients, it had the right structure, we had a shared experience that was strong or not. So I think that's one thing that is already possible to do. We just haven't got it set up. I've already shown that I can do it, and I've shown that I can do it quite quickly. But I just lack the infrastructure to be able to do it, but it can be done easily. And then the second thing is the energy in our own local projects, because if I can see that there's a pattern in our projects that has a sort of lack of, say, technical density around, knowledge management, or it's to do with money, or it's to do with keeping a community of practice engaged, then each of us in this room, if we don't know something to share to help that, we are then missing out on the opportunity to recognize where our own special abilities could actually help somebody else's world. So an energy map of our own experience and an energy map of the experience of our own projects. And then the derivative of that is the energy map of the experience of other people's projects that we could help. So 3 levels, and all of it's doable. And I would invite us to consider a case study of doing exactly that, to see whether we can make sure that we know where our own energy has gone for each particular meeting, so we get fast and rather than do the slow version of seeing whether the energy was right or not, actually have a physical map at the end of each meeting to say, yes, it worked, or this bit worked and didn't work. And not just the discussion of that, but actually as a map. And then the project, and I would really love to hear from Jason in detail about his own project, because that's something that's very accessible to us. And then we could then look at external projects, which is what I think we want to do, having done the local version of how can we help a specific project and the progress in that. So 3 levels, and I think we're trying to jump to the end level without actually doing the first and the second. And if you don't do the first and the second, you won't hang together to do the third. It can't be done. And I'm very clear about that, because we dissipate our own energy because we can't help each other, and we can't be together to help each other. We can't help anyone else. You just end up bouncing backwards at the different levels of how things aren't working. So let's get some maps together. We need them. We critically need them.
Wendy M.
Wendy E, it's every time you bring up an offer to create a map, I just need to let you know that internally I go, oh my God, yes, please. Can we have them all? And in respect to your time is the only reason why I'm not saying, can we have it yesterday? So I see value in the entire onboarding process and capturing stories. I see value in the entire ecosystem of capturing what's working well for people in story form, what's not going well for people in story form. And what I just heard you say is something we could be doing for this particular group right now, and helping us discover where the energy is and where the energy isn't. And I think there's huge value there and would welcome any efforts to that end. And along those lines, I just wanted to voice what I put in the chat, which is we are talking and exploring together about what environments create emergence. And there are some people who have done this work. That is their life's work. I know 2 groups now who that is their life's work and what they've been spending their time on. So we can definitely tap into it. Doesn't mean there's not more to be uncovered or learned or grown from or explored, but we can definitely learn from the tools they've already discovered and helping us create those spaces more quickly, more easily, with less frustration, less retro necessary, and then build on top of it. So before, when I was talking about having space facilitated, I mean facilitated by those people who already know how to structure the best emergent spaces that we know how to structure it at right now.
Beautiful. Okay, let's take just a moment. Let's take a moment of quiet, and then let's turn our attention to what's next in light of what we've discussed today. Okay, so first of all, that was absolutely incredible. I was feverishly taking notes, which we will post. But I think we have a pretty good record of what was discussed. I don't know what you all are experiencing, but to me, it feels phenomenally cohesive between conversations that happened this week, and it all feels like it's pointing us in a really good direction. So I will, I guess, set forth a hypothesis. There was a couple conversations that emerged on getting really clear about what teams we need to facilitate at a reasonable level of excellence in order to hold the space for this emergence to occur. We have an incredible group on this calls, and a lot of people that aren't on these calls, and a lot of like partnership potentials waiting to connect in. So I'm curious about, so next week I'm going to be in Estonia. When I come back, I think that if we set up something like 4 to 7 high functioning teams that were the key teams that were general. So if we thought that around each of the 17 SDGs or something like that the ontology doesn't matter, but let's say there's all these specific verticals, and let's pretend and imagine that phenomenal working groups and contests and resources are available to advance the things that are happening. The precursor to all those things flourishing is us nailing the core groups that kind of cross-cut and hold the space for all of those to emerge. And so if I'm, and I want to honor Pete's admonition of me earlier today and on our call to spend my time in the right places and not do the wrong things that aren't helpful or valued. So next week I'll be in Estonia. When I come back, I'm thinking about how to restructure kind of our weekly rhythms. And I'm thinking that the core unit to hold the space might be a series of a few teams that I can spend time with each week that can kind of coordinate this. So a hypothesis is that we need a resource team. That's a resourcing team that's working on raising funds for the network of funds that will facilitate different areas. We've had a standing resourcing group meeting with some beautiful people that are on this call and that aren't on this call. And we're about to get help from other networks to really broaden that resourcing team. So I would think that one core team that needs to be really highly functioning is the team that's figuring out how to go out and map out and connect resources to things. So that's one team that I would love to be spending time with every week and getting operating at the best level we can. A second team is, and I'm also honoring, again, Pete's suggestion that, and our collective discernment that there's all these amazing people, projects, passion out there. What's missing is the ability to resource those things in the right sequence. So that resourcing piece is critical. Another thing that we've arrived at is the need for a social architecture team that's looking purely at the experiential side of things. So how are people experiencing whatever it is that we're doing or is trying to emerge through us? How are people experiencing that as they encounter it for the first time conceptually or in an idea, as they move into increasingly engagement? How are they experiencing the community, the tools, the processes, all those different things? Kilu, I think that is like the key function that is core to what you were talking about engineering that space or engineering the experience that's had, right? That's the core function of that social architecture group, to really pay attention to and architect experientially what's happening. So there's a resourcing group, there's a social architecture team. There's some kind of a tech/infrastructure dev group. I don't know what that looks like yet or how it gets configured, but there's a whole bunch of people building solution and tools and service of all of this. So Pete was saying, like, a whole bunch of us are infrastructure builders. We want to serve the broadest groups we can. We know it's going to cross-cut a bunch of these. So there's a certain group of people who is working anyway to build tools technology. And if what was most valuable was able to be prioritized and executed on in sprints across the different things that are moving, that could be super, super high leverage. And there's some emergent energy around that. So team 1, resourcing; team 2, social architecture; team 3, some kind of tech infrastructure dev. Team 4 is some kind of core group that's working on the highest level of abstraction. That's not siloed into any one of those slots, but is responsible for looking across those and kind of coordinating and holding space and cross-pollinating information and helping listen deeply, prioritize, lead, whatever you want to call that. So the function of that core group is to be servants and, you know, coordinators and leaders of everything that's emerging and making sure that the whole thing is functioning. The fourth area that's emerging through, let's say, Wendy and Kilu and Judy, is the idea of, I don't know what we want to call this, but let's say wisdom circles. But groups that the community recognizes as exceptionally wise, insightful, sensitive, thoughtful, discerning individuals who are watching the process unfold and paying a deep attention to the patterns and emergence and throwing red flags on the field if anything's going off track with any of the patterning or integrity. That's going to be really, really critical as we start to engage resources to have that kind of transparency and check. And then the fifth one that I don't know if we have the energy present for or not, is on the cross-cutting process side of all this. And so there's, in a system that's trying to bring people together, the mapping of that total set of processes and like how it's working, the way that it's working and why, is super, super critical. So I know that Wendy's been doing a lot of mapping of the flows. I've been doing a lot on that. I think Marianne and Wendy are starting to collaborate a bit on those flows and how they serve Meta Project, how they serve Planetary Care. But that deep like process and flow mapping, to me, like undergirds the ability to have a experience, right? So Hugh was talking about engineering the experience. That whole process and flow mapping getting documented and then operationalized via tech, to me, is like the foundation of the understanding of the articulated way that those spaces are held. So that's some kind of a process component. So those are the 5 core things that are top of mind, I think, right now. And let's say that over the next, Bill says it's 6. Okay, yeah, Bill says it's 6. Thank you, Bill. But if those things were to emerge with reasonably functioning and coordinated things around them, that basic set then I think allows over the coming period all the verticals to emerge that are served, right? So we have all the specific areas of focus, but they'll all kind of be emerged. So thank you, and Pete.
Thanks, Jordan. I love those teams. And I have a caution flag to throw kind of, which is I want to make sure that we balance essentially overhead and execution. So most of the meta project, when it's full blown, when there's a million people doing meta project work, are going to be execution people. They're going to be getting stuff done in the field with other people, building stuff, maybe sometimes software and whatever. But most of the people are doing stuff. The teams that we've got here are kind of like the coordination layer. And, you know, that's, I don't know, for a million people, I don't know if it's 10,000 people or 50,000 people or something like that, but it's not a million people doing the overhead, it's a million people doing the work, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So because of who we are, because of where we are, because we're looking to the future, we're futurists, we're seeing that in a year or 2 years, 5 years time, all of these teams, even more, are going to be like super big, super powerful, super productive, super essential. But there's this weird gap between now, you know, in the next 6 months where I want to make sure that we're doing these things and we're facilitating each other, but I don't think that it shouldn't counterweight actual stuff getting done. And I think it's tempting to build for the future even, but I think that's the wrong way to do it. I think the thing to do is to make sure we're doing at least half real work and half overhead stuff. And when I call it overhead, I'm not denigrating anything. Each of these things is critical. Like I can kind of speak for tech, you know, tech and infrastructure. It's critical that we have a way to talk to each other. It's critical that we have asynchronous communication channels. It's critical that we have long-term memory and collected notes over time and things like that. So none of these things, you know, they're critical components, but they're not the work. They're enabling the work. And I think I feel like we've gotten into our rears almost in doing, you know, meta stuff instead of the work. And I just want to make sure I feel like we need to refocus into getting work done and making sure we can kind of manage it and rebalancing that significantly. Thanks.
Thank you, Pete. Yes. And I can speak for our social architecture meeting this week that I tried very hard, and I hope the energy felt like it was building and not being pulled this week in social architecture when I was trying to shift us from talking about what we're doing and how to enable things and actually do stuff. And, you know, that shift is important. I think it can happen inside of some of these groups, but certainly not all of them. And I think there's a dance here between doing things that actually need to get done, like for this group or for, you know, like composting meetings and right, just the day-to-day stuff, and continuing to think big in the same way that there's a dance between what's emerging and what needs to happen next versus what's necessary in order for work to move forward. To me, it's kind of different polar experiences that are dancing with each other. And I'm glad you brought it up. Another one that I was playing with this week is I was using the societal sectors that many of you know I've often framed things by, and I mapped the societal sectors to the SDGs just for my own curiosity. And that was really interesting. It made me feel like the societal sectors were actually a better way to organize people. And then they, once organized, they then in turn were focused on a goal that was the SDGs, which is a slightly different way to think about it. And when I did that, what happened was it actually highlighted a few societal sectors that aren't represented or don't have a goal that's represented by the SDGs. For instance, media is one of those. So it made me go, right, okay, we need like communications as a team that we haven't even talked about yet, that needs to be a cross-cutting team that goes across all of them and helps coordinate messaging, which was a suggestion that was brought up earlier today as something we actually need already. Arts and creative expression is another one, as an excellent, actually emergent force, where the arts often express things that we can't yet verbalize. They often, and there are definitely groups within our network, just one tier away, who are working on the new things coming into the world and everything we've been talking about but they're all artists and they're doing it from that angle. I think bringing in these other groups and having them inform the total effort is an important thing, that we may want to add goals to those particular groups if we were to form them. And I think bringing all these on together would be smart.
I'm going to make a quick. Keitha, would you like to go, or will you remember what you have? If
I took notes. Yeah, I can go ahead.
Okay. So Wendy, in regards to your request for a project to learn from a real small client, we're doing that. So this idea of going out with UN backing to set up contests, funds, and working groups around all the SDGs, including cross-cutting works that need to evaluate all that, is a real project for a real client that we need to succeed on, and it just happens to be what we're here trying to do. So we're there, and then we also have a few at other various levels of scale. So we don't have time to get into that today, but we're standing right on the verge of being overwhelmed with learning projects from small and large clients. And then Judy, I think, has provided great insight to doing those at different levels of abstraction. I want to respond, and I want to switch to retro after Keitha talks. So Pete, I want to try to just put something into the field and maybe not talk about it, but just have us think about it. So throughout this meeting, we said that all the parts and pieces and the work is out there and it's getting done. And what's the critical missing piece is those elements that allow that network to function in some kind of functional unity to do together what we can't do, And so it might be that things like resourcing and funding, social architecture, core group, these wisdom circles are overhead. It also might be that it's the critical path work itself, right? Because that's what's missing. And so if we envisioned like 3 or 6 months out, a decentralized yet coordinated and empowered team of teams moving in service of the goal, it might be that this quote overhead work is what needs to happen next in order for that to occur. And that can't occur until this happens. So it might not be overhead. It might be like direct critical path work that until it happens, none of the rest of this will happen. So I feel like, 5 years ago, looking at critical path, it felt like legal and governance was going to be the thing that would take years to sort out. And so we spent years trying to sort that out. It then felt like the backbone infrastructure and technology would take years to sort out. So we've all been doing that hard work and sorting out the infrastructure and technology. By January of this year, it felt like we had got far enough through legal, governance, infrastructure, and technology and patterning to where we could convene. It now feels like maybe the next like difficult thing is this quote unquote overhead functions that allows the other things to function, and that it's not overhead because it's critical path, and that once we get it done, then it becomes overhead, right? Because now all this stuff can happen and we can minimize it. But I want to not. So Wendy, for instance, when you say like, could we please have a real project to function to like practice on? We might be doing a real project by doing this work that's not already out there. It's like back to what's the superpower or the ability of this group. It might be that all these overhead functions that the network doesn't have that are prohibiting us from functioning as a body are what we're kind of being called to do. And that is a project in and of itself. I think it is. And that until we accomplish that, like none of the rest of this is going to manifest. So I hope I said that clearly, but I want to just not shy away from saying that all these pieces that are missing that no one's been able to really get into form, if we could get those in form over the next 6 or 12 weeks, like that might be the greatest gift. Then we start doing all the other things that we can't do until we do that. And then they progress to their proper place. So I hope that landed okay.
Yeah.
Kilu.
Kilu, do you mind if I jump in? Thank you. Yeah, what's important, I think, about picking something is it enables the conversation to flow and for people to recognize what's missing so that we can identify the work that needs to get done, right? It's the overhead. And sometimes it's hard to see what needs to get done, or we have so many ideas,
It's not clear, yeah.
right, that we can't prioritize. So I think it's helping people focus on one example helps us say, okay, these 10 things are super important to advance. And those 10 things
Yeah.
haven't happened yet. That's where the roadblock is.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I think what we have is like the universe has delivered us this gift of a mandate, maybe to set up funds, contests, and working groups around all 17 global goals. It's like, well, that's basically the meta project, right? Just in a specific example. So if we picked that specific example, like with a real client of that network of hundreds of people and the UN, and said, okay, how are we going to go get that done? We have a very specific pragmatic example at the level of the meta project, and then that can flow. So maybe it's like all perfectly leading. Okay, Kilu, you have the final word on the meeting that we're a few minutes over on. We'll switch to retro.
Yeah, and it was perfect, Jordan, that you went and Wendy went. And I mean, I'll just start speaking and then it maybe becomes even more obvious. So, Pete, I loved how you invited us to do at least sort of half real work, half overhead. And I very much resonate, Jordan, with also what you say, where we have to know what's a critical path and how that becomes overhead once we've figured it out, potentially, right? But we may not know that. We're in the practice of learning. Same thing to Wendy Elford's comment of let's pick a small project and practice on that, and we may already be doing that. And I would like to propose a slightly different filter that maybe helps see those things in a way that isn't so oppositional between, valuable and not valuable overhead and, practical work. And it is the value filter. And as I think about financing and resourcing, we usually think that financing leads to value creation. That's great. But financing first finds out the value. Money goes to where value is. Then that more money, when it goes to where value is, leads to more value being created. Then more money goes to that value being created, and other things and money go there too. And so if we start looking at what is of value, what needs to be of value, what could be of value and isn't now, but between now and doing 10 steps, it will be. If we keep that filter, then we know what is sort of nice to have and superfluous, and what is in some ways need to have. And in practice, as we lean in, as we start action, we're learning so much from being in action, even if our action is conversation and contemplation and insights at times. We don't come here pour. We come here very richly. There's insight, there's so much insight that arises in each of those meetings. There could be people mining this and, you know, finding a lot of stuff. And that's because of how we show up here. And that's work too. That's practical work. And what happens between meetings and how we make sense of that. And so I would invite us to consider, you know, what's of value that we have right now that's easy for us to see in this moment in time. And then also maybe do some kind of visioning over an arc of time. Because right now, one of the things that is necessary and that would be of value were we to have it already is if we were to have stood up, you know, something that now works. We're talking about standing something up and it's still a little nebulous, right? But that would be valuable. But then at some point, you know, when thing has already been stood up, it's standing now and it's now humming, right? So what does that look like? Like if we were to vision sort of over time, what does that look like? At that point, something else is probably valuable. Because at that point, when it's humming, there's probably a financing ecosystem already ready to finance different things. You know, maybe environmental folks finance environmental and, you know, others in finance, or however it happens, but it's sort of a bit of an ecosystem. And then there's an ecosystem of projects and practices and doers, whatever the focus is on external SDGs or some inner work. I mean, there should be internal SDGs too, as far as I'm concerned, because the lack of internal development creates a need for external SDG work. If we had the inner stuff figured out, a lot of the problems in the world wouldn't be happening to begin with. Nobody would beat their wife and, you know, die of starvation because we take care of each other. And then, in addition to the financing and the doing ecosystem, there will be also a serving ecosystem, the whole service infrastructure that grows up for that. So that's just an image of, you know, over the arc of time, what this is. And then another part goes back to the value question. I think it's really important, and we have not given it enough. I have not found answers to that question in our work together or in my own contemplation. And maybe it's not easy and it shows up in practice. But the question is, why do people join? What does it make that makes them join and makes them stay? If our intuition, if our hunch is true and good, the people join because basically their stuff works better when they're connected with other doers and other information and, you know, into an ecosystem where they are served and so on. That's why they would join and they would stay. I don't know, there may be other things as well, but I think that's a question we need to kind of answer, because otherwise if you build it, they will come maybe. And the question then is, you know, when things are humming well, we may not even need to know who joins and how exactly it happens and all of that, because at some point it'll be humming, it'll be working, it'll be kind of out of our hands if it's successful. And so then the question is, what is important for us to know and what is okay to not know? And why do we want to know? And, you know, what's the cost of not knowing things that we should be knowing? So like right now, it's very valuable who shows up, who we want to engage with, how we want to onboard them and so on. But at some point, it's going to look different because there's already value in the system. There's value in the connectedness of the system, in the information flows, in the potential capital flows, in the respect and whatever. Like environmental movement, you know, let's say that in the beginning, I'm just painting this picture, but maybe there were some people that said, let's now call this environmental movement, and there's a bunch of things, and they became the pioneers, and they became kind of the experts, right? That's usually how these things happen. And, you know, they were fundable, and funding kind of would go around, or at least they could influence some of that. Whereas at some point, when it's a little bit more mature, anybody who's doing a good thing for the environment can get funding directly. They don't need any pioneers vouching for them, right? So we're sort of similar to that. Like the system will be working, but it is of value to stand up, whatever it is that we're seeking to stand up, and it is of value to be in the practice of doing that and using the filter of value itself. If I had today a good story of what we're doing is of value, we could get money behind it. And then a story sort of projecting how else, you know, it grows and so on. We're not tight in that story yet, but I've seen it happen so many times. I mean, it has to be, you know, it has to have the benefit of being true. But I think, it will be and it can be. So if we focus on value, money follows value. And then it also helps build value. And if we have value, but it's not visible and we can't tell the story, then, the funders are like, this sounds really good. Come back, when you can convince me or show me something. So hopefully that's helpful.
Can I jump in just for a moment on that statement, which I think is so critical that you brought up, Kilu, about measuring value, understanding value. So and value to me somehow has a connection, particularly when you're talking about funding, to a measurement of some sort and some level of objectivity to it and such. And so I bring that up just having had the benefit of being exposed to a group of economists that have really developed the skills of doing whole metrics financial valuation, which then all of a sudden changes the entire picture compared to the way it's typically done. But I bring this because it leaves it as an open question right now for me, not necessarily knowing how to, even if one wanted to approach understanding the value and putting something measurable around what Meta Project is. And I want to honor the fact that Jordan wanted to close the door and I jumped and stuck my foot in.
Thank you for that, Forrest. This is great. This is fantastic. Closing thought, and then we'll switch to retro. Is that for the last 20 years, bringing intention into reality in the form of physical infrastructure, one thing that you have to do is have a plan, kind of conceptual plan agreed to in advance, and then every month be able to articulate what it is that you accomplished, how it's advancing the path towards the goal, and why the owner should pay for you to do it, right? And then it's like, after that month of work, you submit the tranche for funding. It's validated in a rigorous process with third-party controls. You get funded, and that's what facilitates the next tranche of value creation, let's say. And so I've long had a vision that something like Lionsburg or Meta Project, with all its attendant things, could be aggregating up all those pieces. Like, so if you imagine a whole variety of different specialty trade partners doing things out on a work site, those get aggregated up into a coherent story that's submitted out and told, right? And then that value is recognized and funded, and then that creates the cash flow to go do it again at slightly larger scale, and that progresses over time and in complexity. So this is all extremely resonant. I think we can do it. I think we've built the tools and technology to do it. I think we understand the process flow of how to do it. I think we have the right people to do it. I think we have the right organizations in our network to do it. We have the right allies. We have the right backing. We're on the verge of, I think, the credibility to do it. And we understand how to act it out. So next up, it sounds like from the chat is, okay, let's go try this, right? Let's go try this and act it out. And the neat thing is we have a couple emergent concrete mandates for real people that we need to go get done, that'll allow us to test ourselves. And also excited to see where that goes. Beautiful. All right, let's go to a 10-minute retro. Pete, are you willing to lead us in our retrospective?
I am.
Thank you.
Let's do like last week, and we'll do 3 prompts, one at a time, waterfall. So the first one, I'll go through all 3, but then we'll just focus on the first one first. So the first one is, I liked. What did we do well that we should continue? And let's take a minute or two and and think offline, and then we'll type in the chat and hit return. How are we doing? Is everybody set? Okay, 3, 2, 1, hit return. So kind of lots of conversation, lots of thinking, lots of flow, and kind of the sense of building. Okay, let's do I wish next. Just what would happen if, or I wonder, sorry, this is I wish, just I wish. Is everybody good? Okay, get ready to post. 3, 2, 1, hit return. Wendy M., I wonder if you could say more about the pattern created today could be the seed for future navigations. What's the pattern, do you think?
Me, Wendy M, or Wendy?
Wendy M., sorry.
More questions and more listening to what is the response from multiple people in the room, and less intended outcomes, I guess, right?
Makes sense. Thank you. Okay, last one. I wonder what would happen if. Everybody's good? Or a little bit more time? Got a few people finishing up. How about now? Okay, let's go for it. Go ahead and hit return. The wonders look pretty deep to me, which I think is a good thing. I won't try to read them out, but click the little 3 dots to the upper right of where you type your message and click Save Chat, and then find it in Document Zoom on your computer. All these are going in the notes as well, and the notes will be posted on the web within 20 minutes or so.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Pete. Absolutely brilliant. Jason, I loved your wish too. We'll try to grant that wish here shortly. Well, this was super, super rich and fantastic for me. And I hope everybody's leaving better than they came into this. Super amazing. I just want to repeat, I feel like, you know, through this hard, like a core group hanging in there through this hard formative work is allowing us to see things that would have absolutely been impossible to see or perceive some number of weeks ago. And so this emergent clarity is like, couldn't have come any other way. So I'm just super grateful to be on the adventure. So thank you all for being here and immensely value your time. Really, really looking forward to this next season and how things transform. So we're on the edge of something magical.
Jordan, next Wednesday, meeting or not?
Yeah, Kilu, how many hours ahead is
It's
Estonia?
10 hours ahead. 10 hours ahead. So it would be
Be midnight right now.
12:30 midnight right now.
What do you
It's
guys
okay to skip a week, I think.
want to? Okay, how do you guys feel about that? Want to breathe for a week and then reset? Okay, beautiful. Well,
Anything to share about why Estonia, just for fun?
yeah. Yeah, okay, so let's so Jason, let's do that over coffee in 1 minute. Let's officially
Okay.
close.
Cool.
So I want to honor everybody's time, officially close this meeting. And Retro, thank you for being here. So much love and appreciation. Meeting adjourned. Okay, now we can hang out in the hallway, Jason. If there's anybody else who wants to hang out in the hallway.
Let me grab my coffee.
So Jason, I'm going to Estonia because every time that I've accepted a prompting to travel somewhere internationally on less than 2 weeks notice, something magical has happened. And so I've made it a practice just to do whatever it takes to respond to those promptings when it feels right. In fact, I bet most of the people here that I know, I met because I went to Kenya on 1 week's notice one time, and it brought me into orbit, probably ultimately with a lot of people. So Kilu is from Estonia. I'm finding out every day new and fascinating things that she's done, her family's done, her father's been involved in, etc. And from my perspective, we need to learn how to serve at all like fractal levels of analysis, from what you're doing on a concrete on the ground project, like up to how we serve and engage at a nation state level, you know? And so anyway, I'm just going because it felt like it was aligned and should be responsive, and I look to love and serve, and Kilu's amazing, and there's opportunities to meet, connect with good people, share information that will hopefully be hopeful and inspiring, and maybe connect in other nodes of energy and experiments. So we'll just kind of see where it goes, but that's my perspective. I'm just being responsive. And then Kilu, do you want to share a little bit about the inception from your perspective?
Sure. So some of you might know Graham Boyd. Graham's a guy who lives in Brussels. And so very practically speaking, and he's involved in the Future Capital, and he's involved in a number of other working groups that Jordan and we have both been involved in as well. And you know him as well, I think separately from our conversations. And so I was going to Estonia because I'm advising a university next Thursday, Friday. I don't do jet lag well. And so I said, I'll go early and leave myself 3 days free and, show up on the weekend. But then I ended up talking to Graham and just asked him quickly, hey, you want to meet in Tallinn for a day? Closer than San Diego to Brussels. And he said, sure. Are there any interesting people to meet? And Graham, if you don't know, is working on regenerative, multi-stakeholder, multi-capital, highly connected ecosystem creation with this different kind of governance and with this, sort of highly aligned ethical regenerative creation of value from incorporation on forward. And I thought that might be interesting for people to talk about. And then once I started thinking who would be interesting people to talk to, I started talking to people that are very much in some form engaged in conversations along the lines of what Meta Project or Future Capital is doing, or else in my mind ought to be, and that's a little presumptuous, but we're meeting with people who are, evaluating trends and informing the parliaments of them, for example. We're meeting with people who are developing the kind of future vision for Estonia. We're meeting with university folks, we're meeting with some leading entrepreneurs and artists and cultural folks and so on. And all of this came together in the last 3 weeks fairly magically, because once I described what Jordan brings in terms of just the sort of the intent of the Meta Project and Future Capital, as well as background, and what Graham brings in terms of his, practical building of ecosystems and incubating these highly connected ways in a country that is very small, but already highly connected, and that a lot of that natural alignment already exists and lives in the way that, country functions. It's also a potential interesting test case, and they happen to be open to piloting things. So whether or not this meeting leads to, this week there leads to any kinds of pilots or projects, who knows? But I'm absolutely convinced that even having started this conversation, even before we have shown up, the world's already changed and the possibilities have already changed. Even just on the side of Estonia and Estonians who have now connected with each other and have talked about some of these things. And that's only going to accelerate and snowball next week. And so I basically just, I reached out to Graham. He said yes. And then I said, well, it really feels like Jordan belongs. And I had no idea whether he'd say yes or no. And he said yes. And at that point, everything's been just magical. The things that have been coming along and showing up, and more than I could have asked for, faster than I could have known, with support. And the chorus and the refrain is very much, some form of Estonia needs it, the world needs it, let's figure it out and let's see what can be done. And it's also practical. Estonia is a pretty pragmatic, practical, sort of down to earth, slightly suspicious and doubtful, and this can't be done, and people compete and pull each other down, and that sort of culture. Like, there's a lot of that, but they also do amazing things. I can't reconcile how on one hand Estonians are like that, and on the other hand they've done some phenomenal things. And so that's the playground. But does that answer the question fairly, I hope?
Perfect. And I like as you said, the innovation and adaptability of Estonia generally is kind of an interesting field by which to experiment, and it's small enough that you can test things that can scale. So that's pretty cool.
Exactly.
It's also,
and at the same time, it's a NATO member, EU member state, right in the armpit of Russia, in an interesting, geopolitical place with interesting resources, and it's always forced to focus. And I try to explain it inarticulately to Jordan as well, but it's very focused on finding ways to punch above its weight.
Exactly.
Geopolitically, economically, in terms of just renown and so on. And that leads to interesting thinking, because you're looking for impact and you're looking for leverage. And these are things good for us to know and see as well. So who knows? Maybe also their conversations are different. It's entirely possible that, there's often, it's said that you need to hear something 7 to 10 times before you can actually even hear it for the first time, right? Because we don't process. And then you need to hear it another 10 times before you can accept it as something that you can operate with. So maybe we're at, number 4 on the list, and they got another 6 to go. Or maybe not.
maybe we got another 6 to go.
Taking up. Yeah.
I also I think we should take a moment and celebrate because, 6 months ago, we didn't have the opportunity to meet with people like this, right? So this is all of us having the opportunity to meet and share information and dialogue with, people who are leading and making decisions at country scale. And that wasn't present a little bit ago, right? So that's like a little just milestone marker that, you don't know why, but for whatever reason, there was enough resonance that, people care. And wanted to meet. So that's kind of like something to celebrate. That's neat. Maybe it'll lead to more.
And to add to that, absolutely agree with the celebration with everybody's role here, and some people who are missing in this conversation, bring us here. And I also want to bring in Wendy M, because in our conversations, sort of asynchronously, it has been so visibly co-emergent, and the kind of synchronicities where there's this notion that there's a conversation walking through us regardless of where we talk, and whether it's about Estonia or what's happening in our lives or what we're thinking of or what's emerging elsewhere. Like, it feels bigger than any one group or any one effort or any one project, even though this is perhaps the biggest project in some ways of them all, assuming success. But it's this co-emerging nature of in some ways being held in this invisible web, fed by this invisible mycelium that is becoming visible because of our precise and intentional and focused awareness, and our being together as a group and articulating and processing in out loud in a group from these different minds. That is a very interesting phenomenon to experience.
I want to just maybe close by just setting an intention, like setting a highest intention. Some number of months from now, it would be really neat if we were working with projects at different scales, from something like UN level international efforts to accomplish a total set of global goals, to nation state level efforts, down to sector efforts in places like regenerative ag or wherever that is, all the way down to supporting on the ground projects like, let's say, Jason's working with. So those different levels of analysis, I think, are really critical. And I don't think we can pick one of those 6 months or whenever that is, or some time from now. If we have little experiments going at all those different levels of analysis, we're going to really test the system and learn, what needs to be done. So maybe at some time in the future that will happen, and just want to set that intention up. All right, well, thank you. I just want to say it again. This is not easy. This is really hard work. It's uncertain, and there's not very many people who can hang through processes like this. So the fact that people of such extraordinary caliber are walking this path together, it's just makes me so grateful. And so I just want to repeat that. This is like the hardest part of this process, and it'll be a lot easier for many people in the future because everybody stuck through this. So thank you from the bottom of my soul. Really appreciate it. Okay, so we'll have next week off. We'll kind of reset around some of these teams and rhythms the following week, and I think we'll be starting a exciting new season. So, all right, much love and appreciation. Thank you. Have just a wonderful, blessed rest of your day and week, and stay in touch and see you soon.